Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another episode of Anarch Abridged. The topic of today's episode is going to be, if we can't resolve our differences through consensus, how do we resolve that problem? So, it should be said right off the bat that this is kind of a niche question, right? I'm dealing with a problem that mostly anarchist theorists are having to deal with, but it also has some practical implications in the sorts of structures we build in the modern day. So let me give a little background to explain what I'm talking about here. When I present structures for coming to agreements, decision-making structures in my videos, the most common question I get asked is, what do we do with those who disagree or those who don't go along with the majority? And this has actually been a pretty common question throughout the history of the movement as well. There's kind of two different categories where we might have this problem, both in the organizations we make today, the sort of revolutionary vehicles that we create in order to take us into a different world, but also in a future society. So in answering these questions, I'm trying to give answers that apply in both, but I'm probably going to have to discern between them when I am giving answers as I proceed here. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit of a long-winded preface here, but I just would like to note that this video is probably not one of those videos that blows up and goes wide. This is one of those that is really meant to answer a common question among anarchists and libertarian socialists and so on. First, I want to say that the process of consensus is meant to come to agreements. If people disagree with the decision that is being made by the body that they're part of, consensus is aiming for a unanimous vote. And that's true of all forms of consensus. There's even forms of consensus which you might call like a weak consensus or modified consensus. I provide a version that I would call modified consensus in After the Revolution. But in every form of consensus, the main goal is to arrive upon unanimous agreement. And many people ask, like, well, how? The answer is you're trying to listen to everybody's concerns as you're proceeding through the decision-making process. You're not just going, oh, we got a majority vote, we're done. Instead, what's happening is if you have people who are not in agreement, who have problems, those people are supposed to bring their problems to the rest of the decision-making body, and then everybody's supposed to deliberate over the problems that have been presented. Now, ideally, the person who has these problems could provide what is called a friendly amendment. The friendly amendment is basically just a way to modify the proposal at hand to make it to where it would garner their vote. And in my experience, friendly amendments can solve the vast majority of all problems and disagreements. So I just want to put that up front. Friendly amendments are generally enough to get to unanimous agreement. But as we've described, we are both trying to answer the question for our organizations, and we're trying to answer the question for a more developed revolutionary, post-revolutionary society, a society that has to make decisions at a very, very large scale now with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people involved in those given decisions. So what I want to say then is just that obviously you're not going to get full unanimous agreement in a society that's making decisions at that scale. It's natural that you're always going to have people who simply disagree with the majority. And that includes both people who they disagree with the majority because the majority is wrong in an objective sense, and people who disagree with the majority because they want to be power hoarders, that they themselves are the ones that are dangerous. So it should be said that, that a minority in voting is not always they're not always the good guys. Sometimes they are purposely trying to put the brakes on the process of development. They are trying to stop a more equitable society from being created. And, obviously we see this within our current republics, is that you always have some kind of not only conservative, but a sort of reactionary, regressive portion of your society. I do not suspect that when we create a post-revolutionary society that we will have none of those people. I suspect we might have fewer of them because I think the structure that we've created sort of encourages their existence. But I do not believe you will ever create a society where there will not be conservatives. They may be a very different kind of conservative because we would have a different default social understanding. But you're always going to have people that are conservatives in some sense, that they don't want things to change. They don't want things to progress. They think the way things is now is good. And you're also going to have people who want to move backwards. You'll always have fascists, people who are trying to return to some idyllic past, and they don't like the way society is now. They don't like progress. So I just want to concede those people are going to exist in every kind of society that you've got. Also, the majority is not always the good guys. As we said there just a minute ago, it's possible that you can have some kind of racial or ethnic or ideological minority who are actually in the right, and the majority of people are horrifically wrong. They have these sort of aggressive beliefs. They are themselves racist, or they are bigoted in one form or another. The majority is also not always right. So I just want to put that up front. Okay. First, I want to say, insofar as that there might be structural, fixes to the problem. If we imagine, for example, that there was some oppressed minority that, they are essentially just being shut out from the decision-making process. And people don't want to include them or want to make decisions which might harm them. One kind of structural solution might be able to create councils that are of that oppressed minority that are always able to intervene and help change the decisions that are being made, to offer their sorts of amendments and to prevent the damaging decisions from being carried out. That's one solution. That solution is actually used in Rojava, for example. But it should be said, if everybody's already dead set on their bigotry or their damaging ideology, that may not ultimately make much of a difference unless you give them some kind of veto power, which of course we could entertain the possibility that those councils of the oppressed or of that minority might be given some form of veto power. However, I think there's another set of solutions. And these other set of solutions are often kind of presented as the end-all be-all solution. And that is solutions based in disassociation. So first I want to say, just because two groups disagree, and once again, I want to broaden this back out. We're not just talking about the situation with the oppressed minority anymore. We're talking about all those situations where people might disagree. You kind of have three options, just broadly, okay? Option number one is y'all both just do your thing. The minority of people just simply carry out things as they want to carry them out. And the 90% or whatever, 95% perhaps of people that think otherwise, they just carry out things as they please. But that's not always going to cause problems. An example I've given before is this idea of maybe the width of the streets or what time of day and what time of night that street lights are on and things like that. You might think of these as just kind of relatively minor, maybe in their area, the street lights are on at a different time and big deal, everywhere else they're on at the time everybody else agreed to, but in this one little place, they're on at a different time, or in this one little place, the streets aren't the same width. You might run into problems later, like transportation or something, but I'm just giving these kind of more trivial examples where it wouldn't really be a problem for everybody to just carry through their different mandates, right? However, I think we can see that that's probably going to be a minority of problems, right? Then we have two other ways of looking at things. Obviously, you have option 2, which is just that minority agrees to do what the majority agrees to. That would be a solution. If the minority says, well, we disagree with it, but we'll go along with it anyway, that would be one solution. And I'm not even saying that they'd have to be forced to do so, but instead that they would just willingly do so. And it's possible that would also happen sometimes. In fact, it might happen quite a lot if you know that you have to make a decision and you know that there's this consensus process. People might just be willing to kind of get the show on the road. I disagree with it, but we'll try it anyway, right? That's option number 2. And then you've got option number 3, which is the one I was alluding to a minute ago, and that is disassociation. They basically are saying, we cannot continue to associate. We cannot work together. We are going to have to go our separate ways. And this concept of disassociation is kind of the one that I was wanting to focus on a little bit, because I think that there are some interesting complexities in here that aren't always really spoken about, but are relevant. So one thing I want to say is this idea of disassociation. At first, it kind of sounds simple. Okay, the groups disagree on what should be done. They go their separate ways. But that's not really simple once you realize that the associations, these federations of councils that are supposedly supposed to be running everything, have basically complete control over how everything is distributed in society, right? They determine how goods and services will be rendered. They determine, where all of these supply chains are directed and so on. So it's not trivial to disassociate from these bodies. Disassociation may mean that you're not provided the things that those associations decide on the distribution of. And I've had some people point out to me, and I'd say fairly so, that, this amounts to a form of implicit coercion. You need to do what that council says, because if you disassociate, then you starve to death out in the wilderness. And, they've noted that this could be considered as like a rising to the same level of implicit coercion that capitalism functions under. Like the boss, essentially, you have to negotiate with the capitalists and work for a wage because your alternative is just going out into the wilderness and trying to make it on your own. The same kind of dynamic might be said to be playing out here. If we imagine that when you disassociate, you are not given any of the amenities of society. But this is that complexity I wanted to bring in. And that is, it probably depends on the scale and severity of the thing you are disagreeing with them on. This is almost in a way a sort of all-inclusive answer to the previous conundrums. And the way that I have laid out the way a federation works, and I might once again note for anybody that's not like super into theory and doesn't know what I mean by that word federation or the word confederation, I'm talking about a nested structure where you have councils at local levels, and then you have the combination of councils that make up a city or a municipal level, and then you have a combination of all those councils that makes up, say, the regional level, and then you've got like the combination of regional levels, which makes up like a national level, and a national level to a continental level, and the continents for the world, and so on. Okay, and I would hope to emphasize here, we're not talking about a representative government where you vote people into all these bodies. Those are bodies of the people at various scales, and they make decisions at those various scales based on who is affected by those decisions. So this is the base premise of how you use federations in order to make decisions in a horizontal function. If you're interested in that, go to the video after the revolution. I explain it to some significant degree there, and I think it'd probably be a good place to start if you're interested in what I'm explaining. But I'm going to kind of take that as a bygone conclusion. Let's move past that. My conception is that the biggest federations, because they are making decisions based on who is affected, what is affected in the process, they're going to be making the biggest decisions that affect the largest array of people and things. So you might imagine that the decisions that are made at this the maximum federated scale, say the globe or the continent or something, they're going to be making decisions about, what are the rights of people? To not be oppressed by others. Do they have protections as racial minorities or as oppressed minorities? Do they have some sort of guarantee that they will not be mistreated? Where are the basic rights to have things distributed to you for your basic amenities to be covered? Where are those going to be determined? And what you might imagine is that those would probably be up at the maximum scale. They'd be up at that total global or continental scale, because that's the scale where everybody is affected by those things. Everybody in the Federation, it matters to them what the basic protections that they have from mistreatment, the protections they have, for example, to vote or participate in the process, the protections they have to, be able to either not only to participate, to perhaps just kind of be absentee, those sorts of things. Those would be at the biggest level. And then as you get more and more local, you're dealing with decisions that bear more and more on local conditions. And that's not to say they're more trivial. It's to say that they deal with things that now only those councils are really dealing with. You get down to the regional level and you're dealing stuff with that only really affects that region. And you get down to the municipal or the city level, and now you're talking about things that only really affect that city. And you get down to like the level of these, little community councils, for example, and you're talking about stuff that only really affects the level of just those communities or workplaces or whatever. And in that occasion, it really depends on where is your disagreement, where does your disagreement lie on the principles of what is being decided. So going back to our examples about somebody who doesn't like the width of the streets or when the street lights are on, that is a local concern. The width of the streets pretty much just affects people who use those streets. And we might imagine that those streets are probably going to be mostly used by people that are in that locality. And so if you had to disassociate, you would only be disassociating from that locality, right? Because that isn't an issue that affects the whole planet. It doesn't matter what the width of your streets are in some, back alley, rural area to someone on the other side of the planet. And therefore, if you disassociated over that issue, you wouldn't be disassociating from the global federated body. You'd be disassociating from like your local council or something. And since the local council is not who makes the decisions about your basic rights and your basic amenities, you wouldn't be disassociating from the body that provided you your basic needs. That would be big scale, because the basic needs of humans is something that affects all humans. The decision that is made on that affects all humans. Same thing with ecological issues, right? The ecological issues would be, especially big scale ones, would affect everybody on the planet, most of them, or a lot of them rather. And so if that's all you disagreed with, then you could just disassociate from that local council and make decisions as you please. And you'd still be able to make your own council, you might say, and still be part of that bigger federation. Because you're like, well, I agree with all of the rules in the bigger layers. I agree with the municipal rules and the regional rules and the continental rules and the global rules. So I don't want to disassociate from the rest of those bodies. I just want to disassociate from this local council that wants to dictate the width of my streets, and I would just prefer that my streets were a different width, or my street lights were on at a different time, or whatever. Okay. And that kind of solves these like very easy problems like that, those sort of like mundane things. Now, of course, there's all the solutions I've described before. I'm not saying this is like the only, this one replaces all the previous ones, but this is sort of the nature of what that disassociation might be. There'd be more and less severe things that come from the effect of you disassociating. But if you want to carry out lynchings, or you want to, do a racist or like a pogrom or some like genocide or something, you are not just dealing with that local council. These are issues that affect everybody on Earth. Whether people can be lynched at a whim or whether people can be oppressed based on their identity. That is not like a local affair. That's the affair of all of humanity. And therefore, if you wanted to carry out lynchings, you'd be disassociating from the global federation or the continental federation. I would say the global federation personally. And that means, yes, in that occasion, you would be deprived of the basic amenities of the rest of society. You would not be distributed food and water and housing and all of that stuff. That stuff comes from being part of the global federation that agrees that people deserve not to be treated that way. And therefore, yeah, you would have to go out into the wilderness and do it all on your own. You would have to start from scratch because you are functioning under a completely different social compact than the rest of the planet. Okay. So what do we do with that problem? Let's say they do that. Well, I would say that global federation is pretty well justified in defending itself from the group of people who wants to go around lynching others. Okay. That's what they were willing to disassociate over. I'd say that pretty well every single layer of the Federation of Councils would be within its rights to defend itself. And that would, I gotta be honest, probably solve the problem. Self-defense is not domination. Their right to lynch people, they want the right to dominate people. And so it's defense to stop them. It's not imposition, it's not domination, it's self-defense. But it would not then be self-defense to stop Bob from making his streets a different width, right? So we can see that there are scales of severity to this disassociation, that there are scales of severity to the sort of like unwillingness to comply to everyone else's decisions. And we can see that having agreements, solid agreements at various scales about what people deserve, what the ecology deserves, and so on, is very likely to solve the problems just described. And you can kind of see that there are like different consequences based on what it is they're disagreeing about. And I think one of the problems that people might have when they kind of come to this discussion is they might assume that there's just going to be a one size fits all answer. And that's not the case. What we would have is we'd have contextual answers that would depend on the disagreements, depend on what the person wanted. And I'd like to emphasize as well that, it's possible that there would even be some sort of like formal and informal sanctions that would take place if a person disagreed on things, but did it in a way that didn't harm others, spreading harmful beliefs, for example. It might be that people just don't want to, distribute you. They don't want to make you priority for distribution for some product, or they don't want to bring you into a decision-making process that might involve those people that are affected by your bigoted opinions and so on. So I think probably what you can see here is that it would be complex, and almost everything I just said about the societal level does kind of miniaturize down into the level of our organizational vehicles. This is the purpose of having a platform with points of unity to it. Okay. Once you have points of unity, well, and you're making decisions, you're trying to arrive at consensus, and the person disagrees with the proposal. Well, why do they disagree with the proposal? Do they disagree with the proposal because they want to do something that is against the platform, that is against the points of unity of the group? Well, then they can just be kicked out of the group. They are not in agreement with the principles of the group. And so disassociation is the solution. But if they're just disagreeing with the proposal because they don't think something is good about its practical measures, something is not good about, its tactics, they don't think it's strategically wise, but they agree with the points of unity of the group, then that's something you need to deal with within the scale of the group. And so I hope what you see is that the answer is complex. It's been about 25 minutes of me talking about this. It doesn't fit in a tweet. It doesn't fit in a paragraph or two. I mean, maybe some of you who are skilled could fit this down into a few sentences or a few paragraphs, but I think by the time you did it, it would be some triviality like, oh, it's so contextual, who can say? And then at that point, it's almost meaningless. I would say that the answer is complicated in the same way that answers are complicated in large-scale structures of all kinds. When you have a large-scale structure, things get complicated. Resolving disputes gets complicated. Things get hard. power is now moving at the size of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And it means a lot more. It has a lot more heft, has a lot more weight, impact on people. But yeah, I think I covered all the bases of what I wanted to discuss here. So I hope that was informative for you, and maybe for some of you that was the answer to a question you've had, because I actually have got this question numerous times, and I actually remember watching debates and disputes where people who were sort of skeptical about anarchism have presented these very questions as some sort of gotcha as to why anarchism cannot work. But what I hope you see is that pretty much we would have solutions, that there are solutions to these problems, and they would just have many different forms, as they do in any society. But that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, click like. Go comment down below. Like, is there something you think I should have mentioned? Do you agree or disagree with what I said here? Do you think that these methods would not work? Or do you think that there's some like major exception to what I've said here, which, does not avail itself to being solved in these means? Yeah, go say something down below. Tell me what you think. And if you like this video, especially if this is like the, second or third time or something that you've like stopped into the channel to watch one of my videos, you should go subscribe to the channel. Lastly, if you really appreciate the work that I'm doing here at this channel, I would like to encourage you to go become a patron on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/ANARK. And I'd like to emphasize that, right now I really need the money. I have been very, very poor over the course of this summer, mostly because my odd jobs revolve around, things that happen during the school year. But yeah, so I just want to encourage y'all, go become a patron. There's all kinds of different tiers, and all of them are very appreciated. But I think that is about it. I'm still going to have to figure out what I'm going to title this video. But I suppose now, y'all, having watched it, you know exactly what I titled it, don't you? Anyway, that's all for today. I'll see y'all next time.